very good morning indeed to you, and these talks continue. I mean, good grief. Oh, all right, hand on heart, I did think we'd get a result yesterday. I wouldn't want to put money on what it was going to be. I lean still a little closer to no deal than I do towards flimsy deal, but probably a little bit closer today than I did on Friday, for the very simple reason... No, closer to flimsy deal today than to no deal, for the very simple reason that, you know, until the axe falls, until the whistle goes, anything can happen on the pitch, can't it? But my goodness me, you can't sort of help wondering whether you might wake up on December the 15th, 2067. Someone on Nick's show suggested that white people will be in a minority by then, but it is also possible that we will wake up on that distant day and discover that the Brexit talks, the Brexit negotiations are still ongoing. The problem is, of course, you know, that if it ends with no deal, that's a temporary fix. Even if it ends with a deal, like God knows how it's going to get ratified by the European Parliament, plural, because it turns out that you do actually have a really big say in your own. In fact, you could be in a small regional parliament in the Wallonia region of Belgium, and such is the democratic exercise that you, or control that you can exercise, you could scupper the entire deal, as the Canadians briefly discovered. But hey-ho, it's too late to relitigate those lies, isn't it, about not having any power and not having any control. But if we do a no deal, then negotiations presumably start all over again. It's the idea of not having any trading arrangements in place with by far our biggest trading partners is just absurd, regardless of what your opinions are. And I think we'll start with teachers and coronavirus in schools today. But just to remind you of something that I have mentioned to you many, 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 many times over the last few years. And I think increasingly, with that tiny little get-out clause, a cat flap, if you like, from the palace of my certitude, those three things are still there. You have to have regulatory alignment on the island of Ireland. The four freedoms upon which the European Union is built are indivisible. You can't have one without having them all. And if you want to trade in a market, then you have to abide by the rules that are set by members of that market, which is, you know, what we used to be. I know it sounds a little bit odd that it could be so simply explained after 4.5 years of toing and froing and yaying and naying, but I increasingly this weekend, I read way more than is healthy this weekend. One paper in particular was quite bizarre. I don't know if you saw the Mail on Sunday yesterday, but my goodness me. It was a sort of curious combination of it, and this was always going to happen. I knew it all along. I think that was Michael Gove's wife. To which you would respond by saying, well, you might have mentioned it to your readers before, if you've known since 2016 that it was going to come down to this, Sarah Vine. You might have mentioned it to your readers before. And then sort of Angela Merkel apparently is to blame. Whereas if you were to read the German media, it appears to be Angela Merkel who has actually suggested that they give it another run around. The pressure from France and some other countries, notably countries with bigger fishing interests, was heading in the other direction. But hey-ho, you know, the British media's complete deafness to anything outside the United Kingdom is the reason why we are where we are, and it's unlikely to get fixed anytime soon. I don't do these sort of phone-ins very often with the B word. In fact, we've done hardly any Brexit phone-ins this year because we've just been waiting for reality to bite. And it's biting now. But instead of me laying down the law, and I know what you're thinking, he'll start off trying not to lay down the law, but he won't be able to help himself. And by 1:15, he'll be reminding you of all the things he told you that were going to happen and took abuse, derision, mockery, hatred, bile, vitriol, all thrown in my direction for simply understanding Brexit. I know that doesn't sound very winning. It's probably not the best way to court new admirers, but that is all it boiled down to. I understood it, largely because you explained it to me. And when I say you, I mean people like Kieran, who's a courier, and John, who runs a freight forwarding company down in... I mean, he's never off the telly now. He's on it more than... Philip Schofield. But good, because finally he's being heard. His big freight forwarding company down in Dover. And what you all explained to me, and particularly my Irish listeners, just crystallised into a three-legged stool. I'm tired of telling you this, but every single thing that's gone wrong could have been avoided if this had been understood from the start. Okay? The four freedoms are indivisible. The freedom of movement of labour, the freedom of movement of goods, the four freedoms are indivisible. So there's no way that you can trade within the single market or indeed be anything like a member of the single market without observing all four freedoms. Number two, regulatory alignment on the island of Ireland. In other words, you have to have the same rules and laws in place on the whole of that island. Otherwise, you end up with a border between the north and the south, and you drive a coach and horses through the Good Friday Agreement. That probably is the easiest one to highlight how little others understood. And I don't know whether it makes any difference whatsoever to you, but I do lean more towards just a complete lack of comprehension on the part of people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and even Boris Johnson, actually. But maybe it's a little harder in Boris Johnson's case, but in Jacob Rees-Mogg's case, he clearly just didn't understand it at all. And when they started talking about technological solutions and things like that, they were just camouflaging their ignorance, but they weren't actually lying. That's a distinction that's important to me. It may not be important to you. So the indivisibility of the four freedoms, the necessity of regulatory alignment on the island of Ireland, and the one that people seem to struggle the most to understand was that the inevitability of a market's rules being set by a market's members. I mean, it really is that simple, you know? If you want to trade in my market, then the members of the market, i.e. the people that fund it and the people that run it and the people that are in it, they will set the rules. And if you want to come and trade in our market, you have to agree to abide by the rules that the members of the market have said. Now, the best case scenario is to be a member. In fact, the best case scenario, the best imaginable scenario, if you live in a country where Euroscepticism is rife, as we did, before voting to leave, the best case scenario would be being a senior member with opt-outs and rebates. And if you're going to struggle with issues of sovereignty with people who don't really know what it means, but my God, do they feel passionate about it, then the last thing you'd want to do is be in the single currency, for example. So from the British point of view, the best imaginable relationship with the single market would be to be a senior member of it without signing up to Schengen because of our racist media misrepresenting immigration. And that's just the reality you have to deal with. And the single currency, because, you know, you've seen how upset people get about a dance troupe on Britain's Got Talent. Imagine if we didn't have pound sterling anymore. These great doughty defenders of free speech would throw their rattles so far out of their pram they'd land in the North Sea. So that is the best imaginable scenario, okay? Yeah, that's exactly what we had. But we are where we are, and the negotiations continue, and very, very occasionally I get to do this. What? And remember, the question that you get asked most often on this programme is why, not what. So I'm going to ask you what, but with the silent why, if that even begins to make sense. What do you reckon now? I like this because I don't have to be, you know, Mr. Blimmin' condescending or whatever the phrase is this week to describe people who actually understand it all. But I don't know what's going to happen next. I have no idea what's going to happen next, actually. I mean, the sticking point seems to me to be very close to impossible, the level playing field stuff. If Boris Johnson has in any way, if he is in any way feeling the hands upon his tiller of the sort of ERG-flavoured ignoramuses who truly don't know anything. I mean, the best way to explain this to people who've just woken up after 5 years asleep, the best way to explain this is that trade agreements are about interdependence. They're actually about the opposite of sovereignty. That's the weirdest thing about what we've done to ourselves. Is a trade agreement is about areas in which you will align with each other in order to make it easier to do business with each other, right? It couldn't really be simpler. So the polar opposite in many ways of this abstract concept of sovereignty is the abstract but more easily illustrated concept of interdependence. Now, I could be wrong on this. I'm going to go out on a bit of a limb on this one. I think this is the first trade negotiation in history that is designed to make things harder for the negotiating partners than they were before the negotiations began. I'll take advisement on that from better educated or better informed people. But I can't quite imagine any circumstances in which two trading partners would sit down around a table to thrash out the detail of a deterioration in their trading relationship. Just think about that, because again, these are the little observations that I thought at the time would constitute much clearer penny drop moments for the country. I'm not suggesting the whole nation listens to this programme, although this texter obviously holds me in very high regard. If I had this level of influence, mate, I could tell you the country would look very different. Good work, James. The more you talk, the faster we WTO, which means that we would follow rules set by the WTO and have even less say over what our country can and cannot do than we do as members of the European Union. But if you haven't worked that out for yourself by now, then there's nothing I can do to help you. Nothing at all. However, what I can do is help people with at least one eye open or with at least a double figure IQ. And that is very simply pointing out that we, I think, are currently embarked in the only trade negotiation in history that involves the negotiating partners establishing a deterioration in their trading relationship. Now, nobody thought that was going to... Nobody who voted for Brexit thought that that was how it would end up. We will negotiate a worse situation than the status quo. That's incredible. You know I'm addicted to these penny drop moments, but that should be surely the moment at which everybody just, oh my God, how have we ended up here? A question to which I also have many, many answers as well, but I won't inflict those on you today. So there's the three-legged stool, indivisibility of the four freedoms, regulatory alignment on the island of Ireland, and the members of the market set the rules for the market. It's so straightforward, simple, and easy to understand. It's a miracle so many people still don't. Then you've got this miraculous scenario whereby I think these are the only trade negotiations in history where both sides are thrashing out the detail of making things worse than they were when the negotiations began, which is incredible, right? But we are where we are. Number three, I'll take anything you've got on this, okay? I don't care how you voted in June. What do you reckon is going to happen? I just want to hear as many different answers to that question as possible, with the constant caveat that I will ask you why, what your position is based upon. It's 12:15. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. And I really mean it. 0345 6060 973. Straight up, simplest question of them all. What do you reckon? Because I have not got a clue. I really haven't. I've got inklings and instincts, and I've got my brain fighting my heart, like so many of us do. And you sort of think, well, if he carries on down the... I mean, if the leopard doesn't change at least one spot, it's probably no deal. It's, and always has been, the only way they can avoid actually writing down what it's going to involve. But I hope I'm wrong. I mean, anything at all, and I know some people are still not prepared to accept or capable of understanding this. You can take your pick on which of those descriptions fits the Brexiter in your life. But things are going to get worse. Any deal at all is better than no deal. I am at some point. I'll wait until the dust has settled and we know what's going to happen next. And then I will go back to that straightforward explanation of everything and ask why you didn't see it so clearly, or why you didn't realise the indivisibility of the four freedoms, the necessity of regulatory alignment on the island of Ireland, and the absolute inevitability of a market's rules being made and enforced by a market's members. Because get that aboard, get that under your bonnet, and everything else makes sense. Ho-hum. Adam is in Bletchley to kick things off. What happens next, Adam?
Hello, James. How are you?
Very well, my friend. What's on your mind?
Good. Just a quick one, really. Yes. In short term, I think there's going to be a no Brexit, after which there will be shortages in stores, etc., etc. Boris Johnson out of number 10. We're going to have a new prime minister, a new
the phone line doesn't merit longer attention. I'll check on whether you've got anything that you want to add, but that's the problem, isn't it? Is that the people most likely to overthrow Boris Johnson at the moment in his own parliamentary party are the people most likely to be still deluding themselves about what no-deal Brexit would mean. So that is in a way, it's the kind of conundrum that we've been contemplating since this whole silly saga started. I would love somebody to tell me that, I mean, I don't mean this in a sort of come and have a go if you think you're hard enough kind of way, although that's also, happening this out, come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. Call me a snake in the grass if you want. I think it must be true, mustn't it, that there's never been a trade negotiation before where both parties are negotiating a deterioration of their trading relationships. And if that might be my favourite skeleton key so far. John's in Hampstead. John, what's going on? What's going to happen next?
Oh, James, it's just frustrating listening to you because there just doesn't seem to be...
It is optional, John.
Well, it is optional, and
So anyway, the question is, what's going to happen next?
Well, the question is, we will end up with a deal. It will probably happen on late night on the 30th or the 31st, and there will be some kind of deal. But if
what will it be? What sort of deal? Why can't they do it now?
Because all great deals happen in the last moments. I mean, this is negotiation 101. This is not new news. Everyone, if you've ever been in any form of negotiating position, anyone will tell you this is when it always happens. This is when it's always happened. And if you could just have like an ounce of optimism, an ounce of vision.
I'm very optimistic. I really hope we do get a deal, John.
You spend the entire time talking about how awful it is, how terrible it's going to be, how the country's going backwards, etc.
Well, that's not true, but B, we are negotiating a deterioration in our trading arrangements.
In your opinion.
Well, it's not my opinion. Okay, so
it is.
Challenge it then, John. What's going to be better? What's going to be easier?
Well, you don't know what you don't know, and no one knows what they don't know, right? And essentially,
very insightful. Just tell me what's going to be better about trade. We don't know until there's... So what could be better than free and frictionless tariff-free trade? What could be better than that?
You made a point earlier.
Come on, mate, answer the question.
I'm trying to.
Good. So what's better than free and frictionless trade?
Nothing is better than free and frictionless trade.
Which is what we've currently got.
Which is what we've currently got.
So what are we negotiating?
We're negotiating a deal post-Brexit.
But if what we've got cannot be improved upon...
It's not just about trade, though, is it?
No, it's also about sovereignty.
Yes, exactly. You made the point earlier about the idea
what do you think sovereignty means?
Being linked to trade.
Yes.
Right? Which I just don't understand the two things.
Okay, I can explain it to you, I think, John. So we need to begin with what you think sovereignty means.
It means making your own rules and deciding your own future and being a country on your own.
Yes. Now, those rules would apply to trade. Yes?
Yeah, carry on. I'm listening.
Okay. And if those rules apply to trade, they must also apply to the people that you are trading with.
Mm-hmm.
Yes? Now, they also have their priorities, which they would like to be included in the agreements under which you trade with each other. That would be their sovereignty, but their priorities are different from yours. So you have a negotiation at which you arrive with two sets of sovereignty, and then you create a compromise or an interdependence, which is what is enshrined in the treaty, and that involves a dilution of this rather abstract concept of sovereignty on both sides.
I still think you're mixing the idea of trading with someone and sovereignty.
But just focus on what we've just talked about. I took your definition of sovereignty, I applied it to trade, I explained that other countries have sovereignty. No, you can keep talking over me. But
I can trade with Bob down the road, right? And it doesn't.
Yes, but Bob has his own sovereignty as well. No, of course it does, because you might want to charge Bob £10 and he wants to pay £8. You agree on £9.
He can choose whether he does want to trade with me or not.
Yes,
he has a choice.
And that's why you have treaties and agreements, which involve a dilution of sovereignty.
The two things have nothing to do with each other, and that's my.
Okay, John, okay, with love and respect, my friend, I really suggest you listen back to the podcast of this programme. Just this last 5 minutes, because it's all there. Everything you need to understand the things you don't currently understand. It's all there.
Again.
Okay? Look after yourself. Adam's in Bletchley. Adam, back to you, my friend. Do you think Johnson could be toast by the middle of next year?
Yes, absolutely. Because, if he's going to go backwards without a deal, it's going to make things very easy for the Labour not to vote on. They're not going to have to vote on it. They're not going to have to take a position on it. If you're going to come back with a bad deal, then, people will say, oh, this is not what we voted for. You should have done better, etc. It's going to be a bad outcome for him.
I disagree, but I derive some optimism from the extensions. The longer it goes on, the clearer the things. Because when we started describing what would happen in Dover in 2018, John's quite a good example of somebody who still won't acknowledge it.
James.
But it gets closer and closer and closer. That even the newspapers that supported Brexit are now writing about tailbacks and chaos and stockpiling and food shortages. The louder that final acknowledgement of reality gets, the more likely Johnson is surely to try and sort of cast himself as having led the country away from those described disasters, and that puts a bit of lipstick on the pig that is the deal that he might still secure. No?
James, but your previous caller just proved to you very, very clearly.
Yeah, but that's one person in Hampstead who doesn't understand it yet. He will do. I mean, I think he probably does. He just wasn't prepared to admit it on the radio.
He's not one person, mate. I got loads of mates at work which are the same. It's completely the same mindset. You know, it's going to be great. It's going to be great.
Oh, still. You're right. Well, I mean, you think you've got problems at work. 27 minutes after 12 is the time, Adam. And I suppose the understanding of the issue is where the condescending comes from. If you don't understand it and you hear someone explaining it, it's very, very comforting to call them condescending or sneering or whatever the words are that Dominic Raab used to describe me back before even he got his crash course in Brexit reality. Shortly. Was that before or after he discovered the importance of the Dover-Calais crossing to UK imports-exports? I can't remember. After, I think. Rowan's in Southend. Rowan, what happens next?
What happens next is no deal, unfortunately.
Really?
Yeah, sorry.
Because of point 3, whereby the inevitability of a market's rules being set and enforced by its members, we still can't quite, or some people won't accept that.
Exactly. And what's worse is Johnson actually didn't want any of it to begin with. He created this shibboleth.
Good word.
And unfortunately, thank you, I've been watching a little bit too much of The West Wing recently. Wonder why.
Is that possible?
Yeah, seriously, it's therapy in these strange times that we find ourselves in.
Yes.
Yeah, you have to go. The point is that Johnson does not actually want Brexit. He wanted to be Prime Minister, and Brexit was a price that he had to pay for becoming Prime Minister. It's personal ambition all the way. If you look before the referendum, was there any thought from him, anything he published, anything that he said, anything quotable, that you could say, look, I think Brexit is a good idea? No. As soon as the referendum came on the table, he thought, right, knives out, let's get rid of Cameron.
Yeah, you're oversimplifying slightly, because there's acres of newsprint about him writing about the European Union being bad, which is a difference. I mean, not even a subtle difference, but not the same as writing about leaving being good. I see him more as the boy at the back of the class who is constantly ribbing the teacher and trying to get everybody to join in with the mockery of the teacher, but he would be absolutely devastated if the teacher threw him out. And because he did so much messing around and heckling and ribbing, he suddenly ended up in a position where he was in charge of getting the teacher sacked, and he categorically doesn't want to be that person, but he is now, and he's got no choice. They're just negotiating the redundancy terms and conditions.
Yeah.
Or the divorce settlement when he never wanted to get to split up in the first place.
Been there, done that, sent that boy to the headmaster.
Well, yeah, I'm going to take her away and go back to the divorce. He didn't want to get divorced, but now he's in charge of the negotiations of the divorce settlement. I am clearly in a bad mood this morning, writes Legal Claret, but 4 years later and we're still explaining to people that sovereignty is the ability to enter a contract rather than being bound by the terms of the contract every single time. I don't want to sound superior, but you don't have to. I mean, if you're in a bad mood already, you don't have to let this stuff put you in a bad mood. You just, keep explaining it, and eventually it has to be understood by almost everybody. I don't know how you'd break it down now. People who would still call themselves supporters of Brexit seem to me to break down into two camps. People who think or claim, and possibly they did, want WTO all along, although they are, of course, incapable of naming a single country in the history of the world that's chosen to go down that path voluntarily. And then the other constituency I can identify are the people that are already trying to blame others for what's happened. Most obviously the EU, Angela Merkel, and quite possibly me. But here's a line which leads us back into the phone-in that we're having. This is from John le Carré's last book, Agent Running in the Field, in which he described Brexit as an act of self-immolation in which the British public is being marched over a cliff by a bunch of rich, elitist carpetbaggers posing as men of the people. I can't imagine who he had in mind, Nigel, Jacob, Boris. Dave's in The Hague. Dave, what would you like to say?
I think there will be a deal.
Why?
Because, A, it's in the interests of both sides.
Yes.
But B, from their behaviour.
Yes.
Whilst the EU has a reputation for negotiations going down to the line, there are some they've walked away from if they don't think a deal is possible. So they obviously think a deal is possible here.
Not obviously, because I could play the nobody wants to be portrayed as the reason why negotiations broke down card, but you're quite right that they do walk away when they think it's a lost cause, usually to come back at a later date, but that slightly simplistic description doesn't work. They always go down to the last minute. It's just not true.
Exactly, and I think it's whilst it's obviously a no deal is much more serious for the UK, it's not good for the EU either.
No.
And particularly Ireland, but also the countries on the North Sea, so the Netherlands, Belgium, France, will all suffer to some extent.
Yes, absolutely. How do you, on a personal level, and I'll ask you this, because I haven't worked it out myself, how do you navigate the difference between think and hope, Dave?
Oh, gosh.
When you say, I think there will be a deal, and I hear, I hope there will be a deal, because I'm guilty of the same condition. Perhaps I'm doing you a disservice, but how do you walk that? How do you tell the difference between what you think and what you hope?
Well, I am, by nature, a fairly rational person. And when I say I think,
yes,
I really do think. It's not just hope.
Yes.
So
even after all these 4.5 years, you think that being rational still plays a part in this process?
To some extent.
Yeah, it has to. But
and it's hard to tell sometimes.
Yes, I know.
And maybe it helps being on the other side of the water, on the sensible side.
Well, in the sense that we're all going to get hurt, but if it is no deal, or even if there's a thin deal, the negative. I mean, that's the weirdest thing, isn't it? The idea that we are negotiating, probably the only time in history of the species, the history of humanity, that two trading partners are negotiating about making things harder for each other in the future.
And it's the thinness of the deal that's the worst part of it. We're arguing about fish and 11,000 jobs, and yet, the city paid 3 times more in tax than it did than our our EU contribution.
Yes, and
so much of that has been lost.
And I was looking at a picture at the weekend of where our vessels were over a 72-hour period in relation to what would be our, quotes, territorial waters post-deal or post-no deal. And, again, get the Keith ready, Tin. I told you that it would all come down to fish. I told you so. Thank you. That's another £10 for Hospice UK. But I didn't think it would be even I didn't think, when I said to you, eventually they'll just be shouting fish out of their bedrooms' windows without knowing why. Even I didn't realise it would be as pathetic as it has actually now become. Dave, thank you. And Theo Usherwood is here to just give us a little bit of an update.
We're still waiting, James, on news from whether the government is going to do a deal with Brussels. Michel Barnier this morning, the chief Brexit negotiator for the European Union side, saying that there could be a no-deal result even in a few days after January the 1st because the various legal processes won't have been, there's now not enough time to put the various legal processes into place to ensure that we can seamlessly go from the transition period into a trade deal style arrangement if a trade deal is to be agreed with the European Union. But if Boris Johnson is going to do a deal with Brussels, the fundamentals haven't changed.
No.
So
the fundamentals being the indivisibility of the 4 freedoms, the necessity of regulatory alignment on the island of Ireland, and the simple fact that a market's rules are made and enforced by a market's members.
Exactly. And if you were to say, well, a deal could be done on fish, fine, but certainly, as you referred to there, in terms of it's impossible to get around the level playing field and the fact of allowing Britain access to the single market, but and then wanted to change rules. It's not going to happen. So attention now in Westminster starting to turn to why that might be, and is Boris Johnson looking at a way of selling this trade deal potentially in the shortest possible amount of time to get a vote through the House of Commons? So what he doesn't want is he doesn't want to give his own backbenchers who might be unhappy at the deal, or the fact that the mere fact that he's done a deal, to gather steam, to gather momentum, and then force him into a situation where he has to rely on Labour votes to get it through the House of Commons. So if he's going to do a deal, to do that deal possibly as late as Wednesday, bring it to the Commons on Thursday, have the vote on in the Chamber on Thursday afternoon.
Take for a drink on Friday.
Go on Christmas holiday on Friday, and the MPs don't have the chance to plot or to cause a huge amount of furore about the fact that Boris Johnson has done a deal.
He'll be chilled on Sunday.
Done.
I like it. What do you reckon, though? 50-50 on that? 52-48? And because that's going to enrage the people who still don't understand anything. And I'm not going to apologise anymore for describing them accurately, isn't it? Because the people that still don't do either they're pretending they wanted WTO all along without understanding what the word sovereignty means, because guess what? We don't write the WTO's rule book any more than we single-handedly wrote the single markets rule book. They'll go potty, all these people that are never off the telly.
But, of course, what Boris Johnson has done in recent days and weeks by talking up the fact that there could be a no deal and that we'll prosper is to give them succour, to give them encouragement that actually this is something that can be done. Now what he has to do, having climbed to the top of the mountain, is to get back down again by actually selling them something, if we're to go on the fact that the European Union isn't going to budge from its positions, which they're going to have to accept, but on the basis that because he has talked up the idea of a no-deal Brexit and that he stands up for Britain and British sovereignty and fish and our rights to go into the world and trade with other countries outside of the European Union, that somehow because he's given that rhetoric, that will be enough to keep them happy.
Yeah, so he'll just prolong reality for a little bit longer until they realise that that's not true.
He needs to get...
Speaking of reality prolonged, guess who wrote this? Aware that it was so it's a counterfactual, okay?
Right.
Aware that it was a close result, and this is Boris Johnson in this theoretical counterfactual, became Prime Minister immediately after the referendum result, which he might have done if Michael Gove hadn't sort of had a change of heart at the last minute and stabbed him in the back, metaphorically speaking. Aware that it was a close result, this is my favourite bit, and keen to prevent a full-scale culture war, Boris applies for the European Free Trade Association, EFTA, as an interim solution, a transition, if you will, which would, of course, have involved retaining freedom of movement of people.
Yes.
Who do you think's written that in the last couple of days?
Don't know.
Daniel Hannan. It's quite incredible, isn't it? As if EFTA, people, will of the people, breaking point posters. Oh, yeah, we're just going to join EFTA.
Yeah.
The mind boggles. Anyway, Theo, sterling work as always, 12:55. Chris has been in touch to say, am I the only one that hears Summon the Usherwood every time he starts speaking, whether you have played the horn or not? No, you are not, Chris. I too get the horn in my mind whenever I hear those words. 12:55 is the time. Dan's in Kingston. Dan, what would you like to say? What's going to happen next?
God only knows, but I just I think there probably will be some sort of deal.
Think or hope. Think or hope. What's the difference between think and hope? That's my catchphrase for today.
Yeah, no, I heard, was it Dave who said that he was a pragmatist or a realist about it. I think maybe I'm the same. Or possibly I'm more pessimistic, therefore it's a hope that there will be a deal. But I just had one point, particularly on the point that we're both negotiating for the first time ever in a deterioration of our relationship. And I agree with that, but I think the Brexiteers, and I'm not one of them, certainly not, but the argument that they'll have is that, yeah, it's a deterioration with our relationship with the EU. Fine, we accept that, and that might be a first. But the point is we'll get the sunny uplands of chlorinated chicken from the US and that's the sunny upland. So, yeah, we're deteriorating this one, but there's more to be gained elsewhere.
Yes, I mean, it defies the laws of gravity, really, that view, both almost.
No, I agree.
But that would be their argument.
That's the argument.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably right. We don't need to trade with our nearest, biggest trading partners because we can trade with smaller partners much further away.
Yeah, well, I think that's their point. Is that you're misselling it. You're misselling it and saying, "Oh, everyone's going to be worse off." Well, their view would be,
Well, that could, actually,
we're going to be better off long term.
It's a very good point. And in fact, the fact that the MP for Shrewsbury, Daniel Kawczynski, is now our trade envoy to Mongolia suggests that actually, we could be okay after all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Exactly. We seem to be doing these deals with the very small. Although we got a deal with Japan apparently, but apart from that,
a rollover deal, slightly. I think the level playing field requirements in the Japan deal are more stringent than the ones we're still objecting to in the. But I could be wrong, and of course it doesn't matter because Japan's miles away, which is the point that people miss when they talk about why can't we have a Canada deal, which does actually involve tariffs. Knowledge and detail, eh? The enemies of Brexit since the moment the word was coined. 12:57 is the time. Shall I squeeze in one more? Oliver's in Norwich, lovely part of the world. Oliver, what would you like to say?
It is a lovely part of the world.
I know.
A place I know you're familiar with. In fact, I think you're familiar with my business partner, Daniel Spencer, which there is a photo of you two from a long time back.
Well, this is going to be... this is a small world. Will you give my love to Daniel? He's gone on to achieve great things. I shall no doubt be coming to him for a job at some point in the voiceover department. Andrew Castle's got all the voiceover work signed up. Can tell by the quality of his shoes. Oliver, we've only got a minute left. What would you like to say?
All right, we're going to plug your book, but I won't.
No, don't do that. No need.
I'm 52-48 for no deal, and the main reason for that is I think that unless the EU can pull something out of the bag which appeals to Boris Johnson's ego,
yes,
i.e. something short-term where he can kind of survive the next short-term stint and then wiggle out of it later, I don't think there'll be a deal.
So if he prioritises self-interest over all else, it's going to be no deal?
Yeah, because essentially, I mean, even the Canada deal, they have to accept EU regulation. That was part of the thing that America didn't like about it. And we won't move on that because it means, in inverted commas, sovereignty. Yeah. So I really don't see how he can get this over the line if he doesn't accept the most basic fundamental principle of the EU, which is that if you want to trade with us, then you trade with our regulations because we don't want you undercutting our market. I mean, it's pretty simple, really.
Well, you say it's simple. That's because you're a condescending, sneering, Norwich-based Ramona. Give my love to Daniel. Oliver, thank you very much indeed.